Welcome back, guys. I'm Zell, and today we got something kind of cool to look at from Millits Knives. Okay, some of you know recently, in the past 6 or 8 months, Millit has started making their own line of knives. The Max Evolution was the first one, and they worked with Jerry Moen for the design. Jerry also makes a custom that's very, very similar. And then here a few weeks ago, they announced that they were going to do a Max Evolution M1 series. And what the M1 series is an aluminum-handled version of the Max Evolution. So whenever they did that, I started keeping track of them over on Instagram, and they come up with some prototypes. And we're lucky enough to get a look at one of the prototypes today. So what you get out of the box is a real nice little zipper case, unbranded. I don't know if they'll stay unbranded or not, but I kind of like that. And some Millit stickers, of course, Millit Knives and a little Millit sticker, Millit made. And inside our little zipper pouch, we have our Max Evolution M1 series. And this is a prototype. It's prototype number 10. So whenever we get to the pause and read card, and as we're looking through this and I'm telling you about it, it's going to be kind of a longer video because I'm going to try to inject everywhere that I'm aware of that this knife is going to differ from the production version. But the biggest thing is the handles. And let's get a look at the knife close up. And what we get are aluminum handles. This one happens to be stone washed. Millit will be doing several different finishes. Some of them Cerakoted, some of them may not be Cerakote. I think they call it armor coat. But anyhow, it's a Cerakote type product on most of the handles. And that's a good thing because aluminum will corrode, will oxidize. So if you get a raw aluminum one, you do want to keep track of it and keep it clean and try to keep it from getting wet too often. Because just like your D2 and some of your tool steels, it will corrode, and aluminum corrosion is kind of nasty. So just take care of it and you'll be fine. Anyhow, this is the inlaid version. We got a piece of maroon G10 in here, and it's kind of a textured G10, which I think is kind of cool. And the inlay is done pretty dadgum well. And it's not completely perfect. If you get right down and look at it under a magnifying glass, you might be able to see a little bit of area there that's not perfectly mated up. But for a prototype version, they have done a really, really good job. And so anyhow, we also have a large pivot, and we'll get to that pivot here in a minute. And our body screws, of course, all well made, deep recesses, and our back spacer with all kinds of jimping down it. Soft jimping too. It's enough to get a good grip, but it's not super aggressive at all. And rolling around the backside, here's one of the differences. My knife has the titanium milled clip on it. The production versions will have a stamped steel clip. I've seen the clip. It's still really cool, so it's not a huge difference, but we will talk about this clip a little more in depth here in a minute. And as we roll around the top, we've got a very nicely centered blade, and we've got a nicely rounded over, or nicely chamfered over, or whatever you want to say there, all the way across and down the spine of the blade, which I think is a beautiful thing. Makes the knife fit in the pocket better and just feel smoother overall. And of course we got our flipper tab here, and our flipper tab has a little bit of jimping on it, but it's not that nasty chew your finger up jimping, so very nicely done by Millit. And our dimensions, and these dimensions I believe will be good for the production version, with the exception of possibly handle thickness, are 5 inches long, closed height of 1.45, and this one has a handle thickness of 0.57. However, it doesn't feel like nearly 0.6 inches. It really doesn't. And the ones that don't have the inlay on them will be thinner by a few thousandths. I don't know if it's the length of the knife or what, but it sure doesn't feel nearly 0.6 thick. Let's do a quick size comparison. And since we're talking semi-custom knives here, I want to throw out another knife that's close in size. We've got a Browse Blades VR71, 4-inch blade here, a 3.9 something, 3.8-inch blade here. Now the Browse is a bigger knife all the way around, but it's also built pretty light for what it is. And I want to get the scale out here real quick, because that is one of the very surprising things about this Millit knife. And do we get, yes, we got ounces. What a deal. The Browse VR71 is 6.2 ounces, which is exactly what I would expect for this knife. It's not super light, but it's not a super heavy weight either for a 4-inch blade and a fairly hard-use knife. Now, our Max Evolution, 4.4 ounces. I got 4.39 earlier, but you know, 100th of an ounce, not a big deal. And this is what you get because of some of the aluminum, and the production models are going to be even lighter at about 4.3 ounces from what Millit says. So we have a really big knife that is really light for its size. We have another knife here. This is from We Knife Company, and this is a 3.9-inch blade in steel liners and G10 with some titanium on it. 5.14 ounces. So Millit has beat both of those quite handily. And, you know, 0.2 of an inch shorter blade, but that shouldn't make that big a difference. So, I just wanted to show that, and here's our standard comparisons. There's our Rat Model 1 and our Buck 110. Very similar in size, but of course both of these weigh more and have less blade. And our Delica. And of course it's bigger than the Delica. And from here I want to talk about this pocket clip. And we're going to get our Levi's up and slide this guy in the pocket. And it just looks beautiful in the pocket. I love the shape of this clip. And guys at Millit, you've done an awesome job on this clip. And here's why. It slides down the Levi's just fine. It's long enough to keep this big old kind of slick knife in the pocket. And also, it's got enough room that I haven't tried this yet, but I'm going to assume that you can get this in work pants. You know, your Dickies, your Centos, and all that kind of stuff without any issue. And if you can look closely there, see those ribs on the inside? That will also help keep this big slick knife in your pocket. And I keep saying slick knife because with the exception of the inlay here, this stone-washed aluminum is very slick. But anyhow, one last thing with the pocket clip. We got our contact point here, and you see that little flip up there? The guys at Millit really thought through the pocket clip. They didn't just slap one on there like what seems to happen with a lot of other companies and a lot of other knife makers. They actually thought it out and built a wonderful pocket clip. And let's get a look at the blade. That's the star of the show. And what we have is 3.82 inches of CTS XHP in this one. In your production model, it's going to be CPM 154, another good steel. You know, it's not quite XHP, but it's still a very good steel. And it is a very high hollow grind, and this particular one is a very, very thin hollow grind. I've got some receipt paper here, and it's just crazy sharp. And, you know, I haven't done anything to that edge, guys. And that's some super thin receipt paper, so, you know, it's very, very well done. Now, I would guess that the production models will have a slightly thicker hollow grind because this one is really, really super, super thin. So I doubt that they would put that out on a production knife. They may, I don't know. The only gripe I have with the blade is there is a bit of a hitch in the grind right there. You can feel a bump in the grind. Not crazy about that, but it is a prototype knife, so I'm not going to complain too much. And on the blade, the only markings we have are Millit on this side, and we have the Moen emblem on this side. And our hollow grind's about, what, 7/8 high. And our edge goes out past our plunge grind. Very, very nice. And from here, guys, we're going to go to our pause and read card. Do note that this is a prototype knife, and the production knives may differ somewhat from what's on that pause and read card, especially in materials and weight. And some of the other things may change as well because, like I said, it's a prototype. Alright, well, let's get a look at what makes this thing work. We have a cage bearing system running our blade and our pivot, and it obviously runs really, really well. And I've got it a little snug right now because I wanted it, I took all the blade out of it and then gave it just a little bit more snug so that it had an opportunity to break in. But even kind of snug, it's doing extremely well. And one thing Millit did, they have hardened steel, several thousandths thick washers behind those cage ball bearings. And that's a big deal in my opinion. You know, we've looked at the Buck Marksman. We had it apart, and it had nice thick bushings in there, or washers, whatever you'd like to call them. Hardened steel, and that knife runs like a dream. I mean, that thing is just absolutely beautiful, the way the action works on it. Well, Millit has done the same thing here. Unlike Spyderco and CRKT with their aluminum foil type washers that they put behind their bearings, we've got nice, several thousandths thick, hardened steel washers, and makes for a great action, one that's not going to get bindy and nasty on you. And our lock mechanism is a liner lock. Now, I do have a bit of complaint here. Not that it doesn't work, it works great. This thing locks up super solid, but we've talked about this a little bit before, and they haven't committed the cardinal sin of putting that super thin little liner lock like you get in a lot of production knives. However, it's just not thick enough for my preference. You know, we talked whenever the Wii 617 came out, we talked about how I was liking that liner lock. And they're using steel, Millit's using titanium, but nice thick liner. And Millit's is not near as thick. And that concerns me. However, this is a prototype and it is the titanium lock, and they intend to have a stainless lock available very soon for the M1 series. So, you know, maybe it'll be a slightly thicker piece of stainless. Now, ergonomically, you know, that's important, and it feels really, really good in hand. The clip doesn't get you, and there's only one thing that kind of gets you, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. But first off, you can get this thing any way you need to get a hold of it, and you're in good shape. However, my one complaint is you're set, again, 3/4 of an inch or so away from the edge of the blade. Not a fan of that. You guys know that. And secondly, they have made this point here rather sharp. I'm not a fan of that. We can bring the Browse back out here and we'll bring a Wii. You know, Browse has a very similar forward choil, but on the Browse, this is very, very rounded, nice and soft. You can get a hold of it any way you need to. And down here we have the Wii. And the Wii does have a very similar, slightly smaller choil, but very similar in shape. And somewhat pointy, but it's also nice and rounded. And that's kind of my issue here. I really believe that even though it looks really cool, a little bit of a radius right there would be a wonderful thing. It would let you grip the knife slightly differently and make it a little more comfortable. But that's my only gripe with ergonomics. Well, no, I lied. I have one more. They give you this forward choil here, right here, and if you get up here like this is really comfortable. Feels really nice, but they could have gave me a couple of more tenths. I'd have given up a couple of tenths of edge length to get a couple tenths on this forward choil. Make it more hinderish, if you will, where that forward choil is big enough to get your finger in whenever you're doing detail work, but gives you a little bit of insurance that you're not going to get up on that cutting edge. And they could have done that just fine here. They chose not to. Maybe they will in the future. Who knows? But that is one kind of a minor gripe. But overall, guys, the action of this knife is beautiful. And like I said, the way I've got it set up right now is not really representative of the action. I've got it just a little snug in anticipation of it breaking in some. But still very, very nice, and the knife is beautiful. And I'm expecting great things out of Millit. They're making some decisions that may not be the most cost-effective decisions. The larger hardware is a big one for me, and that's not the most cost-effective decision if you're running hundreds or thousands of knives. But it's one that pays dividend for the consumer, and it pays dividend for the company later in replacement screws and all that kind of stuff. Because I don't know how many times from other companies I've had to call up and ask to get replacement screws simply because they used a T6 or they red Loctited a T8 down in there, and you waste a driver by stripping it out, and you strip out a screw, and it's just a freaking mess. And I really appreciate them using the slightly larger hardware, especially in the pivot area. That is a beautiful thing. And overall, guys, we'll get one more look at this thing before we take off. Millit has made a rather beautiful knife. And I'm not going to say I'm in love with it, but I am going to carry it. No, I'm going to carry a prototype. Yes, I'm going to carry the prototype because, as some of you know, I may be a future customer of Millits services. So that was one reason for getting a hold of the prototype. I wanted to see how they went about things on their own knives, so that I had an idea of what these guys were all about. And what I'm seeing right now tells me that whenever I get to that point, yes, I do want to talk to Millit. Anyhow, guys, the M1 series Max Evolution, this one's a prototype, appears to be a wonderful knife. Is it going to bear its $250 price tag? For some of us, it absolutely will. For others, maybe not. But I think they've done enough here to warrant a higher price tag over some of their competition. And the guys are really excited about the knives. They are just loving this series, being able to get more knives out to more people than the regular Max Evolution in titanium. So if you're interested, look them up. It's MillitKnives.com. Their website's kind of in pieces right now, but they also have a Spreezy store. That's SPREESY. And of course, you can email them and ask them about it. But I'm liking it for now. We'll get an absolutely full review, a more down and dirty full review in a few weeks after I've had some time to carry the knife. But so far, I think it's going to be a good one. Anyhow, guys, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And you and you over there, have a friggin' wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.